Student Government. Tonight is October 25th, 2015. My name is Mike Young. I'm the president of Purdue Student Government, and I'll be moderating this debate. With us tonight we have Asim Jha, who is a Republican candidate for City Council, Donnie Spencer, who is running as an independent, and Democrat Joel Jones has declined to participate. Donnie, as you'll notice, has a microphone. He's recovering from wisdom teeth surgery, so we want to make sure we can hear him. So if you're wondering why there's a microphone in front of Donnie, that's why. I want to take a little bit of time to explain the rules of the debate, and then we'll get going. So all the candidates will be asked the same questions, and they'll be given equal amounts of time to respond. There'll be opening and closing statements limited to 120 seconds, and responses to the questions themselves will be limited to 60 seconds. I will offer the candidates an opportunity for a rebuttal in response to another candidate's answers, but these are optional and they can be declined, and they'll be limited to 45 seconds. Now this time we'll stop if a direct question is asked. The relevant candidate, if asked a direct question during a rebuttal, will have a minute to respond, and then that time will go back to the candidate who started. The order for the candidates to receive questions will be as follows. So candidate A will get a question first, then he'll have a chance to answer. Candidate B will then have his chance to respond to the question, and then candidate A can offer rebuttal, B can offer rebuttal, and then the order will alternate as the questions go on. And then following the scripted portion of this debate, there will be an open Q&A session from the audience, moderated by yours truly. So we're good to go in the rules. All right, awesome. So without further ado, we're going to get started. The first question I'm going to ask to Asim. Asim, what is your plan to engage constituents if you're elected? How will you remain accessible to your constituents, and how will you remain accountable to them?
Okay, so to basically go through each part of that, piecemeal. The first, most important thing is to make sure that constituents are aware of what's going on. I really think that political apathy is one of the biggest problems within our generation. If you look at historical turnout within this district during midterm elections, you see average turnout rates of 2 to 3%, which is, I think, absolutely atrocious. So what's the best way to approach this problem? Shout out to one of my good friends, Giovanni Malloy, senator from the College of Engineering. He is one of my role models in this regard because he posts the results of every PSG Senate meeting on his social media page. And that is an example which I hope to follow likewise, so that students are aware of what issues are being debated, what issues are being discussed. I intend to hold open office hours, as I do. I'm a TA as well. And so open office hours give a very good opportunity for me to engage with students, to understand what they're thinking, explain the problems to them so that they have a better idea of the material. So similarly, I'd hope to hold open office hours to explain to students what exactly is going on in local government. So by engaging students before votes, during votes. Oh, thank you, sir.
Okay, Donnie, the question to you again is, what's your plan to engage constituents if you're elected? How will you remain accessible to your constituents, and how will you remain accountable to them?
Okay, can you guys hear me first of all? Sorry, okay. So to answer your question, it's kind of similar parts. So to engage students, it's very important that we make ourselves open to the public, not only to the students, but to the community at large. So similar to like Asim had said, I think it's important that we find time to set out a block of our schedule so that we can meet with people, meet with students, similar to office hours, so that they can come to us with their issues, their problems, and we're able to be the liaison between the community and the city council. But as for making sure that students are engaged themselves, I think that we can heavily rely on what the city is currently doing and what the city is planning to do in the future, so that students are able to use their web-based materials, their internet, their web page, so that they can access permits, they can create business licenses. They are able to do things themselves and inquire about things themselves rather than having to go through certain channels. So one of the things that I want to make sure we do is increase Wi-Fi, public Wi-Fi, so students are able to do this kind of thing, and make sure that students are able to interact with different boards and commissions on the internet.
Okay. Asim, would you like to respond to anything Donnie said?
I think that's a good idea in the application. Furthermore, the city of West Lafayette has a lot of room for growth as far as online opportunities are concerned. I just wanted to ask Donnie a bit more about the specifics. So what exactly do you have in mind as to a public Wi-Fi?
Well, so, as for the public Wi-Fi, so with the State Street Mastering Plan, a lot of public officials have advocated for the increase of high traffic areas that they plan to make more outside accessible, so park benches and things like that. I think it would be a great idea if we were able to provide public Wi-Fi so that students and people of the community are able to bring out their laptops, sit down, and get work done.
Okay. Donnie, would you like to respond to anything Asim said? And I apologize, we did have an opportunity for opening statements, which I totally overlooked, but we will have closing statements. Sorry about that. Okay, so moving on to the next question, and Donnie, you'll have the first chance to respond. How would you make a decision on an issue where you received student feedback, but it was on differing sides of the issue?
So this kind of goes with who I am as a person. So originally I was torn as to which party I wanted to run as, and ultimately I decided to run as an independent, not because I disagree with both sides, but because I agree with both. And so I think that it's very important that someone comes together and makes sure that they're able to listen to both sides of the issue. They're able to come together and listen to what a Democrat or Republican has to say, or what someone who says yes and someone who says no has to say. So I think that it's important for anyone in this position to realize that they don't know everything, and that we need to come together and make sure that we get the opinions of outside sources and really take those into consideration. So I plan to take all opinions into consideration and often listen to those rather than my own, because it's true that I don't know everything.
Okay, Asim, the question is the same for you. How would you make a decision on issues where you received student feedback, but it was on different sides of the issue?
So I think the best way to do this in the short term is to start creating focus groups where you present students with the information, all of the information as it is, so that they have the opportunity to go over and you get sort of a feel of what they're thinking. And then generally to approach it with certain guiding principles, because again, my mentality is very similar. Also, the goal should be to solve the problems. So how are we looking at the problem and how are we solving it? And if there are differing opinions on how to solve the problem, how can we integrate aspects of both into our final solution? And how can we move towards that final solution while taking into account the needs of both sides? Because ultimately, I think it's always possible to find a solution that balances the needs and concerns of both sides and both parties, because there are no Democrat solutions, there are no Republican solutions, there are only solutions. That being said, I think being guided by fundamental principles is helpful, but innovation and experimentation is always necessary.
Okay, thank you. Donnie, would you like to respond to anything Asim said?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and Asim, you also have an opportunity. Okay, very cool. Next question. What is the role of the City of West Lafayette in Purdue campus affairs? And we're going to start with Asim.
Okay, so this is a bit difficult because the City of West Lafayette and Purdue are both sort of sovereign entities. Purdue is now part of West Lafayette. So this presents an interesting juxtaposition. I think Purdue should be allowed to maintain as much autonomy as possible because, again, I think the best government is the government that's most local, that's closest to its constituents. So Purdue knows best what Purdue needs. West Lafayette's job is to provide whatever resources Purdue feels that are necessary in order to help Purdue carry out what it needs to do. So for instance, with road repairs, coordinating police and fire departments, perhaps if we could merge the two departments, that might be prudent, but I need to look into the specific financials of that. But as far as the student representative specifically, I think the role of the student representative would be to make sure that campus issues that affect not only campus but also the broader West Lafayette community are heard at the city council level, and that we can implement wide-ranging solutions to solve the issues both on and off campus.
Okay. Donnie, would you like to answer the question? I'm sorry, I'll read it for you again. What is the role of the City of West Lafayette in Purdue campus affairs?
Yeah, so very, very similar to what Asim had said. It's important that we recognize that because Purdue has now been annexed by West Lafayette, that every student is a member of our community, is a member of the West Lafayette community. And so when coming to issues, we need to make sure that we bring the opinions and the voices of students out to the general community. We need to, as a city, recognize that we are now one. And there are instances like infrastructure and roads where it can be dicey between which entity decides on which case, but overall it's important that we come together and make sure that the student voices are the community voices and we're able to represent both.
Okay, Asim, would you like to respond to anything Donnie said?
Just one thing to sort of build on that. We also have to take into consideration that many of the students may not necessarily have a very long-term perspective because they're only here for 4 years. So we have to consider what they need now while balancing that against the overarching needs of the community as a whole. So that's also going to be one of the biggest challenges that we're going to see, is to encourage students to have more of a long-term perspective on local issues. Nothing further.
Donnie, would you like to respond?
I think it should be clarified that although often students don't have a long term, that it is important that we do make sure they do. But there are students here, I think you and I are both examples, who there are plenty of students here who want to make sure that when our children or our grandchildren come to Purdue or West Lafayette, that it's as best as it can be. So we need to focus on the now, but at the same time, the longevity of our community.
Next question is going to go to Donnie to start with. And the question is, how do you plan on attracting new businesses and growth to the city of West Lafayette?
So to go over my campaign, what I'm really focusing on is what I call a voice campaign. And one of the fundamental parts of that is capitalizing business growth and sustainability. So what I believe we can do to not only attract businesses to West Lafayette, but also sustain them, is finding ways that they are able to better coordinate themselves with the Area Plan Commission and the West Lafayette City Council so that they can get the correct zoning to be here, while also having things like tax incentives or student incentives so that students are engaged in these new businesses, and we're able to bring things like Subaru or GE to not only places in Lafayette, but we have plenty of land over here in West Lafayette. So we have what a lot of people call a great think tank over here, kind of, with West Lafayette and Purdue University. Why can't we make it so that businesses come over here to the land on our side of the community by zoning and by capitalizing on business growth?
Great. See?
I would actually favor specifically a property tax incentive plan. We have among the highest property tax rates in the entire state of Indiana. The state of Indiana sets a cap at 1%, and we have property tax rates of 0.96% and an effective rate of 1.12. So because of that, new businesses often may not have an incentive to shift over here to West Lafayette. I would propose suspending property tax for the first year and gradually escalating it up to the prevailing rate over a period of 5 years for new businesses. If the business hires large numbers of students or is in fact founded by students or alums of Purdue, I would propose extending this window to 10 years. And by doing this plan, hopefully we're encouraging student entrepreneurship. We already have examples of Purdue Research Park, which are public-private partnerships, the Anvil, which is an incubator for student entrepreneurship. And so hopefully by encouraging these opportunities, we can attract more new business and sort of cultivate an entrepreneurial atmosphere in West Lafayette. And then gradually, as we have more and more and more businesses here, the tax base of the city will increase, allowing us to decrease the prevailing tax rate across the board, which will attract more settlement, and then you get a feedback loop to improve the quality of life for all of the residents here in West Lafayette.
Donnie, would you like to respond?
I think it should be, sorry, I'm going to try it without that. I think it should be important that we focus on the student aspect of that. So in our previous question, we mentioned how some students are focused more on the here and now, and like you mentioned, I think we could find ways to make sure that our new businesses or our sustained businesses hire students, find ways that we can give those businesses who go out of their way to make sure that our students are employed while they're here. We can give them certain tax incentives to stay here and to continue doing that so that they can then create their own businesses and move on and make our community as best as they can be.
Nassim, would you like to respond?
So the only thing, I think that's a good idea in principle. My only one hesitation is making sure that businesses aren't neglecting to hire local residents in favor of hiring students. Because we want to make sure that local residents are also being employed, that they also have a stable livelihood, and that is also sustainable. But provided we can ensure that, there shouldn't be a problem.
Okay, next question. We're going to start with Nassim, and the question is, what are some of your key strengths that you bring to the table, and what are some specific examples of you demonstrating them? And then what is your greatest weakness?
All right, so some key strengths that I have, I was born in an immigrant family, and so I would like to think that I have an understanding of various cultures and various opinions. I grew up with a different culture at home and a different culture outside. So having to navigate through that whole experience actually enlightened me a lot on how to talk to different sorts of people who come from all sorts of varying backgrounds. And so just having that sort of conversation opened me up ideologically to all sorts of possibilities. I like to look at the politics of various different countries. I like to understand where their various parties fall. And so that's just something that's interesting to me, learning about different people, different cultures, where they come from. And then one of my greatest weaknesses on the flip side, I'd say, is that I tend to be very utopian sometimes. I like to think sometimes that there's a perfect solution for a problem. And in trying to pursue that perfect solution and trying to implement it, sometimes I can disregard solutions which are almost perfect, but don't quite fit. But in reality, there are no perfect solutions to our problems. So it's just a matter of experimenting and distilling it to the right answer.
Donnie? The question is, the question is, what are some of your key strengths that you bring to the table, and what are some specific examples of you demonstrating them, and what is your greatest weakness?
So since mid-high school, I've been actively involved in local government, political science, and things like that. And since the first day I've gotten onto Purdue's campus, I've made sure that when I go out and I spend my free time, I'm able to advocate for the student voice. So I have been actively involved in Purdue Student Government, which is the main organization who tries to represent every Purdue student's interests at both the local, state, and federal government. And I've prided myself in spending over 15 hours a week actively trying to do that. And so my strength is really the devotion to students, the student voice, and political science in general. I've added it as a major, and I think that by doing that, I'm able to better understand what's happening at different levels of government and foreign governments, and really apply it to our West Lafayette local government. But on the flip side, that can also be a weakness. So I've found that my devotion sometimes leads me to think in one-track mind. You're able to, when you pile all these things on, when you're able to wanting to trying to devote your time to one organization, you might be blindsided by the other people and the other organizations that are around you. So I should, while devoting so much time to Purdue Student Government and to other organizations that try to represent the student voice, I think I really need to also pay attention to smaller organizations that I'm not a part of.
Sam, would you like to respond?
Nothing further.
Donnie? Okay, next question. And we're going to start with Donnie on this one. How would you define your leadership style?
I would say that it's a team. So my committee, I always work with my committee. I often confess that I don't know everything. So I need my committee to give me their opinions, their thoughts, their ideas, and because of that, I thrive.
Sam, how would you define your leadership style?
See, I'd say my leadership style is best defined by sort of a Taoist kind of an idea. I had the opportunity to be a team leader for BGRI, and the majority of my students were from China. And so I had a great learning experience there as far as, Taoist ideology and that entire philosophy system. And so generally I try to go with the flow. I try to understand the way things are going and try not to fight too strongly against them, but sort of control the flow of the currents as they may go, while still sticking to the guiding principles and the overarching ideas. That being said, on critical issues, I tend to be very, very planning, scheduling. I have my 4-year and 5-year plans set out for my college experience, and I have 3 different ones that I juggle between. So I tend to be very, very strictly analytical and very plan-based on absolutely crucial issues, but on the vast majority of issues, I tend to be fairly relaxed, and I just sort of go as it goes.
Hey, Donnie, would you like to respond to anything Asim said? We're going to begin with Asim. The question is, what specifically differentiates you from the other candidates?
So I think what specifically differentiates me is my sense of work ethic, my sense of devotion, and the overarching desire to improve the community, this desire for continual growth, continual progress. My entire discipline focuses on how we can make systems better. And so just approaching it from that mindset, approaching government not as sort of a different entity, but approaching it as a system, looking at it as almost a machine that's to be fixed. I think that's what really distinguishes me from the other candidates, is my desire to look at this machine and fix it. Because the reason I chose to go into government, it's not my major, it's not my area of study. I see it as the one area of society that has the most room for improvement. Because it is not being fixed, there are no solutions to our problems, people don't want to solve these problems. So I'm going into it from a purely analytical standpoint, that how can we find solutions to our problems? How can we structure and organize and resolve these issues? Not on an ideological basis, but simply on a pragmatic basis. So I'd say that pragmatism sort of differentiates.
Donnie, specifically, what differentiates you from the other candidates?
I would say that it's been my enthusiasm and devotion throughout this entire process. So since the first day that I stepped on campus, even before the redistricting, I've been involved in the processes for this district to making sure that there's been a student voice in local government. I've attended all but one city council meeting since August of 2014, and so it's been my absolute pride and joy to try and make sure that there is a student voice in West Lafayette local government, and I think that it's vital that we compare that some candidates aren't even wanting to participate in this debate, but I think that we should really see, how much emphasis that I'm trying to put on making sure there is a student voice in local government, and how I'm really trying to interact with the current sitting council members and the current leaders of our community so that student voices are heard.
Wasim, would you like to respond to anything Donnie said? Donnie? Okay. Okay, next question is we're gonna start with Donnie, and the question is, what is your view of the current State Street Master Plan? Which improvements, if any, would you suggest?
Yeah, so this was brought up in our last debate. I think the State Street Master Plan is a fantastic plan. The mayor and the sitting council members have been working on it for almost 4 years now, and they've really taken some thoughts and opinions of the community and made sure that it's what most of the people want. So, but as for improvements, which there always can be some, I think that the consideration for biking and for bike lanes with the State Street Master Plan have not been adequately met. I think that our community is one of the largest biking communities in our state, and I think that this very large road project that we are now undertaking is not considering the fact that there will be small little bicycles going in front of what now can be semis on our main road. So I think we need to take into consideration that we do have a lot of bikers, and I think we need to incorporate that a little more.
Okay, Wasim, again, the question is, what is your view of the current State Street Master Plan? Which improvements, if any, would you suggest?
All right, so primarily I want to make sure that the State Street plan doesn't divide campus, almost like the fences on Northwestern do. Because if you want to go to Wang Hall, no longer can you just cut across, which I understand in the interest of safety, people put that out. But I don't want there to be huge hedges down the middle of State Street preventing folks from going from North to South Campus as they see fit. I want it to be more of a unifying feature. Adding to that point, one of the biggest issues that we have is drainage. Here in West Lafayette. We are dumping raw, untreated sewage into the river because our drainage system is beyond its capacity. Rainwater pools up within our streets because we just can't handle it. So this sounds a little bit of a tangent, but what we can do is we can actually construct rain gardens as part of the State Street Master Plan to beautify West Lafayette and also to act as a reservoir to trap and hold this rainwater and have it absorbed. And this would be considerably cheaper than actually constructing a reservoir to hold this. And this is an environmentally friendly solution that would both beautify our city, be a crucial part of this State Street Plan, and reduce expenditure as far as the dumping is concerned.
Donnie, would you like to respond to anything that Wasim said?
No.
Wasim, would you like to respond?
So as far as the bike lanes are concerned, to the best of my knowledge, bike lanes do exist for the entire path, but I think that is an important concern to address, to make sure that we're taking the needs of cyclists into consideration.
Okay. And our final scripted question, if the city of West Lafayette, I'm sorry, we're going to start with Wasim on this one. If the city of West Lafayette ran a $1 million surplus on any given year, how would you recommend that money be utilized?
All right, so the first thing I'd want to do is to put it in a rainy day fund, because we don't want to be irresponsible with this and just spend it all in the first year and then have it all disappear. A $1 million surplus is a great thing. It's a treasure that we should hold on to in the event of a catastrophe down the line. But I would immediately put it into that fund, and then if there are any crucial upgrades that need to be made within the city, we could draw a little bit out of that. Other than that, I'd say you keep it aside as a fund, and then whenever it's absolutely necessary in order to withdraw from that, that can be sort of a surplus source of revenue. And then whenever we have surpluses, to sort of put it in this fund, and then whenever we need to run a deficit for short periods of time, such as when we're doing infrastructure upgrades, I think that could sort of serve as a buffer in that case, to make sure that we're always running at sort of a balance.
Donnie, if the city of West Lafayette ran a $1 million surplus on any given year, how would you recommend that money be utilized?
So what I feel is one of the largest problems in West Lafayette and our community is that as it currently stands, the West Lafayette Police Department and the Purdue Police Department are about the same size, yet West Lafayette has to cover about 3 times the amount of size. And so with that $1 million, we could find ways to increase our police department. We could fund more training for our fire department to make sure that we're able to keep students safe in their rentals, keep students safe in their dorms or sororities, and we're able to make sure that students and people in our community are as safe as they possibly can be in whatever way we need to. So I think I would use that money to increase our local police and fire department.
Asim, would you like to respond to anything Donnie said?
Yeah. I politely disagree with Mr. Spencer's opinion. We're the 7th safest city in the state of Indiana. And I don't think it would be as imperative to expand the size of the police department. We currently spend $1 million a year in pensions for police and fire. And so adding to the size is increasing the pension burden later on, which if the surplus doesn't stick with us, then that's not something that we'd be able to sustain. And I think that the population size of Purdue and West Lafayette are about the same, even though the area of the city is larger. So I'd say that the way it stands, perhaps even by integrating Purdue and West Lafayette PD, you could eliminate whatever overlapping elements there are and, in fact, reduce costs across the board.
Donnie, would you like to respond?
I think it's important to note that although there is about the same amount of population, it doesn't take the same amount of time for an ambulance to get from one fire station to one block, whether that be from here or across the town. So I think by increasing our size, by increasing the amount of people or the amount of equipment that we have, it doesn't necessarily have to go into more officers, but maybe that be better cars, or maybe that's more equipment for our fire department to use. There's no reason why we can't be the safest city in the state. So I think that there are always ways that we can improve our police and fire departments, and I would use that money that way.
And so I was actually wrong. There are 3 more questions left to you. The last question we started with Asim, so we'll begin with Donnie on this one. So Donnie, the question is, what steps would you take to reduce sexual assault and improve sexual health?
So in the last couple of weeks, President Daniels has announced the creation of the Care Center, and I think that's great steps for our campus to move in the right direction to making sure that we're focusing on sexual assault and domestic abuse and things of that nature. But as a community, I think that there are other ways that we can make sure our citizens are safe. I think with ways like increasing the size of our police department, we can make sure that roads are safe constantly throughout the night. By improving our infrastructure, we're able to have more lit areas during the night. We're able to make sure that people are kept safe throughout both campus and our community. And by increasing what we see on campus, our blue boxes, to the surrounding areas of campus where students and other people live, I think that we can find ways to prevent sexual assault before it actually happens.
Same. The question again, what steps would you take to reduce sexual assault and improve sexual health?
All right, so to start on the first half of that question, I think the most important thing that we can do right now is to prevent sexual assault from even happening in the first place. I think a lot of this happens because folks are unclear on consent laws, and making sure that perhaps through additional training, more sexual assault education, we can make sure that people are absolutely unequivocally sure about what constitutes consent and what doesn't. To make sure that students, when they choose to consume alcohol, are doing so responsibly, because it blurs judgment on both sides, both the victims and the perpetrators. So it's a factor that we need to consider, because it is, in fact, a factor. And beyond that, making sure that the community is as safe as it can be, additional blue boxes, and actually lighting up areas, I would say would significantly increase the security of various areas, especially on campus. There are certain streets that are very well lit and certain streets that are poorly lit. And as far as sexual health is concerned, I'd say increasing awareness of how to use contraception, increasing awareness of which sexually transmitted diseases exist and how that they can be transmitted. I'd say that would be a crucial aspect of expanding awareness and health.
Donnie, would you like to respond?
I would have.
And Asim, do you have any response to what I said? No? Okay. Next question, we'll begin with Asim. The question is, which key metrics would you use to measure the progress of your key initiatives?
Okay, so 2 key metrics would be cost and time. I think that's the best way to look at any project is sort of the cost, the input cost, and then the output return on investment that you get, as well as the time it takes. So looking specifically at State Street, there are 3 competing bids at the moment. Because we're not privy to the inside information to know exactly what's going on. If I had the fortune of being elected, I would analyze these things and look at what are the various costs. And I wouldn't necessarily go for the cheapest plan immediately, because the cheapest plan isn't necessarily the best plan. I want to make sure that we're getting the best value for our money. So that's the output cost, to make sure that we're making an investment in our community that's healthy, that's sustainable, and that'll grow us. And as well as time, making sure that whatever project we're thinking of will be quickly achievable in the short term and will yield dividends over the long term. And to make sure that we're improving the safety and the health and the happiness of our populace.
Donnie, the question is, which key metrics would you use to measure the progress of your key initiatives?
Yeah, I think time is absolutely the most vital because our population is so transient. I think that we need to find a way to make sure that the initiatives we do now, the things we do at this moment affect the students that elected us. So by improving State Street Master Plan, I think that we need to make sure that we choose the people so that students are able to see those changes now. We're able to see an increase in lighting, an increase in police safety now rather than years and years down the road, which doesn't affect them. And that kind of goes back to the increase in political engagement and the reduction of apathy. I think that if people begin to see how it affects them, we make sure and we focus on the time constraints of things that we do, we're able to do them right.
Asim, would you like to respond?
Not good.
Donnie? Okay, now the real last scripted question. And we're going to start with Donnie. The question is, what is the first thing you would focus on if you were elected?
So one of the first things that I think we could do as a community is expand health services. So as it currently stands, when an individual is seriously injured, it takes almost 20 minutes for an ambulance to get to the nearest hospital. And so I think that that's of great concern. I think that we need to find ways to zone areas for hospitals and for urgent cares to come closer to this side of campus and to this side of our community. I think that while Lafayette is doing a great job in respects to health services, I think that we ourselves can find ways to make sure that we are protecting students and West Lafayette citizens' physical and mental and sexual health.
Asim, and the question to you is, what is the first thing you would focus on if you were elected?
So I think the single biggest priority just going in right now is the State Street Master Plan. The 3 competing bids are being considered federally, so that would be the very first thing that a city councilman or councilwoman would have to consider. So looking at those bids, making sure that we're getting the best value for our money, that would be my first priority starting out. To make sure that the State Street Master Plan that we do ultimately select is in a manner that is both harmonious to the students as well as the larger community, to make sure that it's a unifying feature, as was mentioned previously, that it's done in sort of a carbon neutral or carbon positive fashion, and that we're being environmentally responsible in the way that we're building it. It has a lot of aspects that I'm very interested in, like lots and lots of roundabouts, lots of bike lanes, lots of paths, lots of lush green scenery. And I really, I'm a nerd for infrastructure, so that's just really, really interesting to me. And so to make sure that all these attractive features are actually implemented in a way that students find appealing and that, improves the aesthetic of the overall community.
Donnie, would you like to respond to anything Asim said? Asim?
Well, actually, one thing. So how specifically would you like to make sure that health services are attractive?
So there are many ways that a city can make sure that, or incentivize, I guess, hospitals and other private corporations to come here and increase the overall well-being of our community. So I think that by things that I've mentioned, like tax cuts or tax incentives and simpler ways to zone and rezone in our community, I think that with the huge spots of land out by 231, I think there is ample room for a hospital or for places for that.
Okay, and with that response, this concludes the scripted portion of the debate. Sorry. So the time is about 7:40, so we've got about 20 minutes left. And what we're going to do now is entertain questions from the audience. So just please raise your hand and then, yes, in the back.
So what are well, this is for either, so I'll let you decide who answers first, but what is your position on concealed carry on campus and why?
Donnie got the first response in the last question. So Asim, the question is, what is your position on concealed carry on campus
Correct.
and why? Is that
Yep.
correct? Right.
So in general, this has been a very contentious issue. I think my job as the candidate for the city council would be to represent the views of the majority of the students, which, as per the recent survey, was overwhelmingly against concealed carry. However, the wording on that survey was a bit confusing, so I just want to make sure that the majority of the student body is in fact opposed to it, because we want to clarify the wording, perhaps run another survey to see what the views are of the population, because if most people feel uncomfortable, then that would be my job, would be to represent that population. That being said, I would not be averse to a trial program, perhaps with Purdue PD, to see if such a program might be implemented or whether that would be palatable to the people. Because I think the key metric to look at is whether there's an increase in gun violence on off-campus areas that still have the same campus culture as opposed to on-campus areas. Because the ultimate priority, whichever decision we make, is to make sure that students are safe and feel secure.
Donnie, the question was, what is your position on concealed carry and why?
So, similar to what Asim said, I think it's very important that we take into consideration what the general overall student body thinks. And like he said, the overall majority has said that they are very much against a conceal and carry on campus. Personally, I agree with the majority. I think that conceal and carry poses a greater risk for students on campus. Personally, I wouldn't want to worry, or I wouldn't want my professor to worry if a student's going into his backpack for his notes or for a weapon that he's carrying. And I think that at the same time, we need to find ways that we can increase the overall ability of Purdue Police Department and West Lafayette Police Department so that they can keep our community safer rather than students taking it into their own hands.
Asim, would you like to respond?
My only contention is that we have to be very careful here because a gun-free zone doesn't necessarily prevent individuals from bringing firearms in. So we have to make sure that we're being very, very careful that individuals don't have the ability to bring firearms into campus if we want to maintain a gun-free campus. Because a gun-free zone effectively deters lawful gun owners. So we just want to make sure that that distinction is very clear.
Donnie, would you like to respond? Okay. Are there any additional questions from the audience? Okay. Giovanni?
Would either of you ever vote for a tax increase, and if so, why? Or what would this situation have to be where you would vote for a tax increase?
So the question is, would you ever vote for a tax increase, and in what scenario? And Asim went first last time, so Donnie, you get to go first on this one.
I think it would be very, very close-minded to say no just immediately. I don't ever think it's a great idea to have people spend more money if they don't have to. But we all know that there are certain instances, like, if there's a drastic need for road improvements. Governor Pence is finding ways to try and not increase Indiana residents' taxes, but at the same time, our roads are deteriorating. So I think we really need to weigh the options. I think we need to find ways that we don't spend money frivolously. I think that it's very important that we make sure our money is spent according to the way the people who voted our leaders into office, how they want. So I don't think I would ever want to, but if there is an opportunity or if there is a chance where we absolutely need to, then it's whatever's best for the community.
Asim, the question to you is, would you ever vote for a tax increase, and in what scenario?
So generally, 95 to 99% of cases, I would strongly oppose a tax increase because I think that would impose a greater burden upon the population and would take more of their money for government use. And generally speaking, I believe that the private sector is far more efficient at using its money than the government is. That being said, I wouldn't be averse necessarily to a tax increase if it could be proven beyond a reasonable doubt that it was absolutely necessary to get something done. That being said, I would prefer sort of tightening the belt and making sure that we're doing things in the most financially responsible way that we can. However, for certain things like a space program, for instance, like if we were to build a space base right here on Purdue and set up a moon colony, I would be willing to increase my property tax a bit to fund that. But these are sort of once in a lifetime sort of opportunities. So for those limited opportunities, perhaps, but for the vast majority of mundane things, I think we can find solutions operating within our means financially.
Donnie, would you like to respond?
No, I think it's important to note that West Lafayette's doing a fantastic job as it is financially. For the past, as many years as I've researched, which is 5 or 10, we've been in the black. So even during the recession, West Lafayette and our leaders have found ways to make sure that we're financially responsible and that we're doing all the things that West Lafayette does great without going into debt and things like that. So, but that's a very important point to bring up.
Asim?
Furthermore, as far as spending is concerned, with the State Street project, what I really like is that we're using a tax increment financing, TIF district. So basically what happens is the city continues to collect the same amount of tax from the property, from the entire stretch along State Street, over the next 20 years that it is now. And whatever increase that's there is actually returned to bond owners who have bought and invested in city bonds. So that's actually a very reasonable and very smart way to encourage private investment in a city project without increasing taxes. And I think that's a very effective solution, and if we can implement it in other areas as well, where we can get a lot of private investment. I think that would be very beneficial as an alternative to raising taxes.
Thank you. Any other questions? Oh, we got a couple. We'll start over here and go that way. So go ahead.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but international students make up almost a quarter of the Tippecanoe County. What are your plans to integrate them more into the West Lafayette community? And either of them can go first.
Okay, so the question was, international students make up about a quarter of Tippecanoe County. What is your plan to integrate them into the community? And Asim, you'll go first on this one.
So I think the biggest problem that we see is there's a significant language barrier. Often there's a significant cultural barrier. And I saw that because I was a team leader for Boiler Gold Rush International. And it was very interesting to me to see the huge difference in culture, the huge chasm that exists often between international students and domestic students. And often the students who have studied in English-speaking countries or in international schools have an easier time bridging that gap. But it's just a very difficult problem to resolve. And I think making information accessible, actually going out to international students, perhaps even presenting the information in their own languages, would be a very useful way to make it comfortable for them. If we could perhaps translate our meeting notes, translate the bills that we're voting on, and post them around town, post them in areas where international students congregate generally, then I think that might have a very positive impact, especially in, for instance, Chinese or Hindi, which tend to be the two most prevalent languages among international populations.
Donnie, the question again. International students make up 25% of Tippecanoe County. How will you integrate them?
So another part of my voice campaign is to vocalize student issues, and one of the main ways I want to do that is by appointing students and other people in our community to the various boards and commissions throughout our city government. And you know, there is a big limitation between what international students can do because they can't vote, but that doesn't mean that they can't participate in our government. So by appointing different international students to these boards and commissions and having them directly put their opinions and their voices into city projects and things like that, I think we can find ways to, rather than just inform them, to actually have them interact and engage and make our community better with the diversity that they bring from their background.
Asim, would you like to respond?
I think that's a good idea. Nothing further.
Donnie, anything? Okay, who had their hand up over there? Yep. Go ahead.
Back with the question about the gun control question, you guys both seem to point that like a survey would indicate what your view would be. Would there be cases then that you guys would, either for either candidate, that you would potentially like go against your principal based on what the student body or what your electorate might have in mind? Or how would you deal with those cases where it seems like the majority of the population wants something that you don't want?
So the question, and correct me if I'm wrong, the question is if a survey or some other feedback source showed an opinion different than your own personal opinion, how would you make a decision? Is that right?
Sure. Yeah,
okay, cool. We will start with Donnie.
Yeah, that's, I would say that it varies case by case, depending on the issue. I think that a lot of times I am just one person, and I can understand an issue and spend as much time as I want, but that's nowhere near, you know, the mass, the entire Purdue student population. And so, I would take all of those opinions into consideration, and to be honest, it's the people's choice. It's the people's opinions who voted an individual in, who decide who runs our government, who runs local government. And so if an overwhelming majority of the district said that they agreed or disagreed with something, I think that we should follow that.
Asim, the question to you, if a survey showed a consensus different from your own beliefs, how would you make a decision?
So generally speaking, there was a similar question earlier. I would favor focus groups as a means to see whether or not this variance in belief is due to misinformation, lack of information, or whether it's due to genuinely well-informed opinion. And we want to make sure that the students themselves are well-informed on the issues, on all sides of the issues. I would try to inform myself to the best of my ability to see if that would change my opinion either way. To see if, a diverse body of students, when exposed to all of the evidence that's presented, which way they tend to lean before and after. I think that would probably be the best way of seeing which decision is best for our community, to make sure that students who are making these recommendations are well-informed, and that we as well, as candidates and council members, are well-informed.
Donnie, would you like to respond?
No.
Asim? Okay, well, are there any additional questions? We have time for probably one more. Okay, go ahead.
So your constituents will specifically be largely comprising of residents of university residences. So kind of a two-part question for you guys. How do you view your working relationship with university residences and Res Life? And maybe what is like one issue you see facing that specific institution or population that you feel your position as city council would benefit?
The question was, how do you view your relationship with the residence halls, and what's one specific issue that you would have to work with them on?
Yeah, like that you would be able to address in your capacity as
One specific issue that you would be able to address. Okay, Asim, you're first.
So I was actually a floor senator for Street Club, so I had the opportunity to interact within the residence hall organization, and that was a good experience, sort of trial run of government, if you will. And it was a fun time, and we got to vote on all manners of proposals. I actually managed to help out in getting a drum set brought to the basement of the street, which was a permanent infrastructure improvement that I'm proud to say will stay far after I graduate, I hope. But one key issue which I think that we can help RHA with is making sure that students who are on campus and students who are off campus still have that sort of overarching connection. RHA pertains specifically to the res halls, but as in our capacity as a councilman or councilwoman for West Lafayette, we need to make sure that off-campus students also feel like they're sort of plugged into something. Because there's that lack of a sort of a unifying force. So perhaps increasing the presence of RHA, making sure that students who live off campus still feel like they're represented, that they still have a voice. I guess bringing all of this together would be a crucial aspect in which we could work together with RHA.
Donnie, the question is, how do you view your relationship with the residence halls, and what is one specific issue you'll address?
Yeah, so I would say that my relationship with residence halls is very good. I often consult with RAs and ADACs throughout the res hall community to ask their opinions on things. I'm the people at the front desk, make sure that how they feel on certain issues. They're putting their input into my campaign and what they feel the West Lafayette City Council can do to benefit those individuals. One specific thing I think we can improve as a city government for the residence halls is their ability to interact with government. So as it currently stands after this election, the closest voting center will be in the Union, which is not in the district. It's very not traveled necessarily by students at that time of day. And so I think that's a very simple, easy way that we can engage residence halls, have a voting center in the lobby of one of the places that we live. You know, our government goes so far out of the way to bring voting booths to those in nursing homes, which is great, but I think that we can find ways to bring it to our community, to bring it to places, maybe Crop, or places where students can engage in their government.
Okay, Asim, any response?
Yeah, I think Crop would actually be a pretty good location because it's fairly central if you look at where the res halls are placed. So it strikes me as being a very ideal location. And I think it's reprehensible that we don't have a polling place within our district. But it's a new district, so I think that's just growing pains that we'll have to deal with later on down the line.
Donnie, anything? No. Okay, so we're out of time for questions from the audience. So with the time that we have left, I'd like to give the candidates an opportunity to make a closing statement. You'll have 2 minutes to do that. And we'll start with Donnie, and then Asim, you'll go.
First, I want to apologize for today. I had invasive surgery the past week, and so if you were unable to understand anything that I said, or if I didn't come off super clear, please come contact me after. Come up. I'm trying to make myself as open as possible. I wanted to make sure that students knew who they would be voting for, and so for that I apologize. But as for myself, I think it's really important that you know that I'm focusing on an independent student voice. Throughout my campaign, I want to make sure that students are able to go to their student representative and see them as a person, see them as someone that they can talk to, and are able to move past certain labels or boxes that national parties may put us in. And through this campaign, I'm vocalizing student issues. I want to make sure that students are on these boards and commissions that I mentioned earlier. I want to organize a safer community. I want to make sure that our fire and police departments are well-versed and are able to keep our communities as safe as possible. I want to improve our infrastructure by making sure that students are well lit when coming home from campus buildings at night and are able to cross roads safely with the highest technology that we're able to put I want to capitalize business growth and sustainability. I think that we can bring new businesses here while also increasing the revenue and longevity of the businesses that are already here. And I think that we need to expand health services so that students and people in our community are able to be as safe and as healthy as possible. So if you have any questions, if you feel like there's anything that you want to say or do in local government, I feel like we can work together to create a student voice. So, thank you.
Thank you, Donnie. Asim?
So my name is Asim Jha. I'm currently a sophomore in electrical engineering. And my platform is basically my last name, Jobs, Health, Accountability. By jobs, I refer to all manner of jobs, blue collar, white collar, student jobs. And as mentioned, I would favor property tax incentives in order to attract more businesses, more manufacturing businesses to form sort of the bedrock of the economy, more service businesses to cater to students and provide a better nightlife, day life within West Lafayette, Chauncey area. And furthermore, more startups, more student startups. As far as health is concerned, I would favor improvements on civic health, making sure that our infrastructure is top-notch, that the State Street redesign goes as planned. Our fiscal health, making sure that we're spending responsibly and carefully and safely. Environmental health, making sure that we aren't dumping excessively within the river and are using cost-effective, pragmatic solutions to reduce that. And sexual health, to make sure students are well educated on the sexually transmitted diseases that exist and contraceptive options that are available to them. And finally, on accountability, being open and accessible, having office hours, meeting with you guys, listening to your perspectives, being open-minded. And so that's basically the gist of my platform. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or check out my website, jha4wl.org. So that's that.
Thank you. Thank you to both candidates for a very civil and substantive discussion. And thank you all here in the audience for being here. This is the first time that there's a city council candidate directly representing these parts of West Lafayette. So it's really cool to see everybody out here. I also want to say thanks to John and Sharif for helping me time this and handle the logistics of getting this set up. There's food and also an opportunity to meet and greet with the candidates afterwards if you guys want to talk. So with that, we'll end the debate, and thanks for coming.
Quick announcement on the pizza. It'll be here any minute. It was supposed to be here